This has been the hardest year of my life. And I know it has been for many of you too. This year we have lost. This year we have learned how to live differently. This year we have learned a lot. I have learned how to live alone, how to single parent, how to cook, what to do with a flooded basement, how to be still and feel my feelings, and how to listen to myself and honor what I hear. We have spent a lot of time with ourselves this past year and more, but 5781 was a year of time with self. The holidays are early, but they're right on time, depending on which calendar you're looking at. Hebrew calendar, they're right on time. And I think Gregorian calendar, they're right on time too. Even the land is ready for this year to be over. I was out for a walk in my neighborhood in early August, and I noticed leaves changing color. I noticed red and orange leaves in August. That heat dome that we had here in Seattle in June shifted our entire ecosystem. The grapes that grow at my house on my back trellis, usually harvested at Sukkot, are ready for eating now. They've been ready for eating for weeks. I've been enjoying them. The raccoons have been enjoying them. This year is ready to be over, and our Hebrew calendar year arrives just in time. The land is exhausted, and so are we. But there's good news. 5782 is a Shemitah year. It is a sabbatical year for the land and for us. Our source texts for Shemitah come primarily from Exodus 23 and Leviticus 25. Just as the seventh day is one of rest for humanity, so must every seventh year be for the land. Shemitah, outside of the land of Israel, it's an agricultural practice that our Torah commands for the land of Israel. And so outside of the land, we are left with this question mark of how do we engage with Shemitah, popularly known as the year of release. Well, I think that is a big invitation to do whatever we need to do with Shemitah, to bid farewell to 5781. Back at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of talk about using that time like a sabbatical, like Shabbat, a big rest. I don't know about you, but 5781 was busier and harder than any year I've had before, because we can go from Zoom call to phone call to meeting, and with no time to walk in between places, let alone drive from meeting to meeting. 5781 was not a Shabbat. 5782 is meant to be. My teacher, Rabbi Jonathan Slater, explains, all efforts to coax the earth to produce for our benefit are to be released. And so too, we can apply that to ourselves. Shemitah is also about the remission of debts. Deuteronomy 15:1 says, every seventh year you shall practice remission of debts. And Rabbi Slater translates Deuteronomy 15:2, the very next verse, as, regarding the matter of Shemitah, stop your customary behavior and let it go. So what are we going to let go of this year? What are you going to let go of this year? I have a suggestion. This is our holiday where we think about tshuva, right? The act of turning, translated as repentance. Tshuva is multifaceted, though, and I want to focus tonight on the ideas of apology and forgiveness, ultimately working together to help us forgive ourselves. We have to do our work, and the work of seeking apology and then forgiving ourselves and others. So apology lets go of shame and regret. And forgiveness lets go of anger and pain. It is like the two sides of the coin, pardon the pun, when it comes to debt, this release of debt. On the one hand, we are all lenders. Rabbi Margolis teaches we are all lenders when we feel we are owed an apology that has yet to come. Maybe let it go. An apology that will never come. Let it go. This takes some work. Forgiveness is a practice. Simultaneously, we are all borrowers when we owe someone an apology. We don't apologize because we are afraid. We are afraid to reopen old wounds, afraid to admit our wrong, even when our conscience knows that we have been wrong. Apology, too, is a practice. Many moons ago, I was listening to a podcast while doing the dishes, another skill that I picked up during the pandemic, podcasting. And one podcast was about apology. It was beautiful, Unlocking Us by Brene Brown. Highly recommend all of her podcasts. And then the very next podcast that came up in my feed was also about apology from The Real Question. And so I thought, okay, universe, teach me about apology. Because of course we all have apologies to make. I also at the time was a little afraid that maybe I was going to really do something horrible and I was going to be needing to apologize. So far, so good. But from these podcasts, I learned a few things about apology. But first, I went to our tradition and looked into the ingredients of apology from the Jewish perspective. And of course, Maimonides, who really loved to give us step-by-step guidance, Maimonides gives us 4 important steps, 4 of the most important steps of teshuvah. First, to verbally confess your mistake and ask for forgiveness. And be specific. It's about acknowledging the hurt that was done and addressing it. 2, express sincere remorse, resolving not to make the same mistake again. We have all been there. And the nice thing about Kol Nidre in a few weeks is that Kol Nidre understands that we're going to make promises this year that we're not going to be able to keep. And so in Kol Nidre we say, all of the vows I make this year are null and void. But when we're trying to change behavior and mend relationship, we have to do the work of resolving not to make the same mistake again. 3, do everything in your power to right the wrong, to appease the person who has been hurt, to make them whole. I lost a dear friend's first edition signed copy of a book that he lent me. I got to track that down because I have to make him whole. And 4, we have to act differently if the same situation happens again. That's the real seal on the deal of teshuvah. And in this act of return, when we find ourselves faced with the same thing, we have to do it differently. And when asked, well, what happens if we don't? What happens if we're not there? What happens if it never happens again? And Rambam says, don't worry, it will. On the Brene Brown podcast, I got a modern take from clinical psychologist Dr. Harriet Lerner, who speaks of 9 essential ingredients of a true apology. And there's some correlation here, so bear with me. 1, an apology does not include the word but. I feel like that's really good advice to just stick in the back pocket, right? I'm sorry, but doesn't count. 2, the apology keeps the focus on your actions and not on the other person's response. I feel like that's part of the but, right? I'm sorry, but you were angry too. That doesn't count. 3, it includes an offer of reparation or restitution that fits the situation. Okay, so here, Lerner and Maimonides are coming together, right? Making whole. 4, an apology does not overdo, right? The last thing we want to do when we go to someone for an apology is make them feel like they have to take care of our emotions. That's just emotional labor that we're putting onto them. It's not really an apology. 5, it doesn't get caught up in who's more to blame or who started it. 6, requires that you do your best to avoid a repeat performance, right? Rambam says you're going to be faced with this same thing again, and Lerner agrees, just do your best not to do the same thing in the same circumstance. 7, and this one's interesting, an apology should not serve to silence. So apology is not an end of the conversation. If we go into an apology expecting that to be the end, that's not really a true apology either. Apologies are frightening because they could open doors to things that we don't really want to hear. But that's the practice of apology. 8, an apology shouldn't be offered to make you feel better if it risks making the hurt party feel worse. It has to pass through these gates of speech, right? Is it true? Is it necessary? And is it kind? Is this apology actually about the person, or is it more self-serving? And finally, Dr. Lerner says, the apology does not ask the hurt party to do anything, not even to forgive, which leads us to forgiveness. So apology lets go of shame and regret, and we can have this spiritual Shemitah practice of releasing ourselves from this feeling of indebtedness. Okay, but how do we forgive? Well, Maimonides has something to say about that too. Maimonides rather famously says that when someone implores us for pardon, when someone asks us for forgiveness, we should grant them that forgiveness wholeheartedly and soulfully. Even if we were persecuted and hurt exceedingly, we should not be vengeful and grudge-bearing. So often we've heard it said, well, Jewish tradition says if somebody if somebody apologizes and asks for forgiveness, we are bound to give it to them. And yes, Maimonides is outlining that for us. But what does that mean? It's not forgive and forget. That is not a Jewish practice, at least not in my family. Forgiveness is about making whole, but not erasing the harm that was done. And ultimately, forgiveness is about us, the one who is doing the forgiving. The other person, it will make them feel better, yes, if we say, I forgive you. But for us, Maimonides points to this fact that we should not be vengeful and grudge-bearing. It only hurts us, truthfully. And to draw from another religious tradition, another mindfulness tradition, and quote the Buddha says, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. So forgiveness ultimately benefits us. It is an act of letting go, of release. Dr. Edith Eger is a Holocaust survivor and psychologist practicing in the U.S., and she focuses specifically on the treatment of PTSD. And she asserts in not one but 2 books that forgiveness is a choice. It's not something that's going to come to us naturally one morning. We'll wake up like a Disney princess and stretch our arms and think, I forgive everyone. That's not going to happen for most of us. For most of us, we have to choose and then practice. We have to constantly be coming back to that forgiveness. Dr. Edith Eger says, when I am angry at you, I give away my power to you. You don't suffer, I do. She tells a story of having met a 14-year-old boy in Texas many, many years ago. And the boy told her that America has to be white again, and he's going to kill all of the Jews and people of color. Said this to a Holocaust survivor. And so she says, so I had a choice to either react or respond. She says, if I would have reacted, I would have taken that boy, I would have dragged him into a corner, and I would have stepped on him and said, who do you think you're talking to? I saw my mother go into the gas chamber. But, she says, I knew that God sends people my way. They don't just come to me. I had to understand that that little boy gave up all of his freedom to David Koresh, a white supremacist organizer. So she says, I took a deep breath, and I looked at that poor boy who gave up his freedom to David Koresh, who taught him how to hate, and my empathy took a hold of me and said, tell me more. Eger says, if I live in anger and pain, then I'm a hostage of the past. And so we come now to the sort of coming together of these 2 skills of apology and forgiveness. Rabbi Alan Liu says, self-forgiveness is the essential act of the high holiday season. So not forgiving ourselves is like drinking poison. We have to do the work, make our apologies, follow Maimonides' guidance, get Dr. Lerner's book, The Dance of Anger. It sounds great and very helpful. And then once we've done that work, we have to forgive ourselves. If the person is no longer available to apologize to, if you miss the chance during their lifetime, you can still forgive yourself. Self-forgiveness does not mean forgetting what you've done, nor letting yourself off the hook for it. It means releasing yourself of the anger and pain directed at yourself. This release makes it a perfect spiritual Shemitah practice. 5782 is a time to release our emotional debts, our indebtedness. This all takes work. It's hard to let things go. And we will have thought that we've let them go only to see that they sneak back in somewhere and are still holding on to us. And then we have to gently let them go again and expect that they might come back around in a different way. So it's not something that we do one and done. It's something that we have to cultivate an intentional practice around. I want to end with a story. It's called When Pots and Pans Could Talk. There once was an elder who used to go to the river every day to draw water, and he would bring 2 jugs with him. One of them had the tiniest crack in it, but he continued to bring that jug and the other one to the water every day. As the years went on, the crack got bigger, and the water ultimately didn't make it from the river back home. And so the pot said to this elder, "Why do you still use me? I am cracked. I am not serving my purpose. You could certainly get another pot to replace me. I am broken." And the elder said, "But you know what? If you notice, the pathway from the river back to my house, all the wildflowers are growing beautifully." So our broken places are not to be thrown away. They are sites of something generative, something growing. And in this year of Shemitah, where we're just supposed to let the land do its thing, we should let our own broken places do their thing too. Rabbi Alan Liu teaches there is an awareness out there that knows precisely what we have done and how we feel about it, and that awareness forgives us. Kal v'chomer, all the more so, we ought to forgive each other, to seek apology, and to forgive ourselves. Ken Yeh Ratzon, may it be so in 5782. Shana Tova.